everyone. It's 1:45. Let's get this started. My name is Victoria Sampson. I'm the Chief Director of Space Security and Stability for the Secure World Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you all stalwarts who stuck around till the bitter end, the very last day, the very last afternoon of the IAC to attend what I think is going to be a really interesting discussion with some fantastic speakers here. We'll be looking at the intertwined relationship of space sustainability and security, how they're both needed to make space safe and predictable for all, which I realize is a mouthful, but I wanted to make sure that if there's one message that you were to take away from this conversation, it was the idea that you cannot have space sustainability without space security. You cannot have space security without sustainability. I admit I'm kind of biased. My organization, the Secure World Foundation, we're a nonprofit that focuses on the long-term sustainable use of outer space. So we promote best practices and norms of behavior to make sure that space is accessible to and usable for all over the long term. As such, we focus on sustainability. We just announced we have our second edition of our handbook for new actors in space. Out there, it's available for free on our website, identifying if you want to launch a satellite, here's sorts of things you need to know. As well, I'm the co-editor of our Global Counterspace Threat Assessment that looks at open source, unclassified information about counterspace capabilities around the world for 12 countries now, but I think we'll be adding more next year. So I'm a little biased because that's my job portfolio, but I truly believe that you need a safe and secure, stable, predictable environment for all actors to continue to get benefits from space. So when we're talking security, it does not just mean military, it doesn't mean weapons. We're looking at a predictable domain of uninterrupted, uninterfered with space capabilities. As such, I think it has a really strong lens with space sustainability. Also, I'm here with my hat on. The head of the IAF has a SIS agenda, Sustainability, Investment, and Security. Our leader is there in the audience, Joe London. And I'm the Security Task Force head. So that's really why we wanted to have this conversation, is just demonstrate how all these issues affect each other. So with that long-winded introduction, please allow me, I'm going to have my speakers go down the line, introduce themselves, who they are, their jobs, why they're here, and maybe talk a little bit about how they view the relationship between space sustainability and security. And I'll just go to my right, Almudena.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Victoria, and thank you to the Secure World Foundation for inviting me to speak today. Such a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about this topic, which I agree, I think it's really important. My name is Almudena Azcarate Ortega, or Almu for short. I am the lead space security researcher at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. For those of you who are not familiar with UNIDIR, we are an autonomous entity within the United Nations that focuses on research on disarmament and arms control topics in multiple fields. As I said, focus on space security, and what we do with our research and our work is we support primarily states. We assist them in making informed policy making. We brief them in formal fora such as the General Assembly, the Conference on Disarmament, etc. And we also produce research that is freely available to anyone who might be interested in these topics. So I encourage you to look at our website and find out what we have out there. In terms of the relationship, should I tackle that already? Or yeah, okay. In terms of the relationship between space security and space sustainability, one thing that I have to say is that at the UN, we do very much like neat little separate boxes. So you might be familiar with COPIO as the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which deals with the peaceful uses of outer space or space safety. That is unintentional, not necessarily human actions that could pose a risk to space systems. And then in the CD, the Conference on Disarmament and First Committee, we focus on space security, which is, intentional, harmful actions to space systems by humans. And we often perceive them as separate because they are dealt with in these separate fora. But the thing is, what I like to say is that these are two sides of the same coin. You need both space security and space safety to obtain space sustainability. So space sustainability essentially could be defined as leaving space as well as you found it, or even better than you found it. So ensuring that your space activities do not impede these space activities of others, both in the present and in the future. And so space security is very much part of that. If you, if you threaten space services, if you disrupt or damage space assets, that space sustainability is going to also be challenged. And not just space sustainability, but also sustainability on Earth, because of how essential the services that space systems provide are for the prosperity of Earth. And at the UN, we have what you might know as the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and how, in case you're not familiar, but space technology pretty much makes every single SDG a little bit more accessible. So it's not just space sustainability that's connected to space security, but also sustainability on Earth. I'll leave it there, and then we can get a little bit more into it, but I'll hand it over to my colleagues here.
Hi, thank you again for having us on the panel. I do apologize that I am not Melissa Quinn. I am Carrie Mertz. I'm the Director of International Business for Slingshot Aerospace. Melissa was unable to make it today. But so Slingshot is a space situational awareness company, and so space security and space sustainability are something that are very close to our hearts here. And one of the things that we really focus on is that it's really important for every space operator to have access to timely information on the movements of their satellites. And so we provide a free tool for all commercial operators to use called Beacon, so that they can manage their assets in space and have access to that information, and make that information available to everybody, so that you're having more sustainable actions in space. And so from a security standpoint, space situational awareness is really important to make sure that we're not creating any more debris, because it can affect all of our assets that affect so much of our infrastructure, as you were just talking about. So that's sort of how Slingshot participates from a space situational awareness perspective.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Victoria, for inviting me to this interesting panel today. I'm very happy to sharing my view with you. My name is Aya Iwamoto. I'm Vice President of Strategy and Policy of Astroscale Japan. And Astroscale is a company headquartered in Japan with global footprints focusing on space sustainability. And I'm from the Japanese subsidiary. And as for today's topic, what I'm going to share today does not necessarily represent my company's view, but I'm taking the liberty of discussion at AAC to share of my view today. I hope some of you might have seen the time-lapse footage or images of the space debris taken from 50 meters away from our satellites at the booth. If you are not, I recommend you to go and check it out. And obviously, ADR could contribute to remediate orbital environment, so it works for sustainability. And when it comes to space security, I know that there are some concerns of our RDO capability will be used for counter space capability, but also I think the images you've seen at our booth is, it's kind of the images that what normal people can get, what SDA means, or what we can see in the space. And then I think I'm very personally interested in some of people who are interested in space security knows that, verification issue has been a roadblock for arms control discussion. So I'm very curious to know how these technological developments would expedite or move the arms control discussion in orbit. And so that's, to me, it's kind of the intersection of space sustainability and security.
Thank you. We're going to have time as a short panel. We only have a half an hour, but if there's any questions from the audience, hopefully we'll have time to get to them in a little bit. But I wanted to talk really with you guys about this. I know when we talk about space sustainability and security, oftentimes people think, okay, well, really, this affects only people or operators active in space or those who have strong space systems. And I'd love to hear the panel talk about how emerging actors can be affected by issues affecting space sustainability and security. Maybe Alba, Dana, you want to start with that?
Sure. Well, I would also extend that not just to emerging spacefaring actors, but also even those actors who are not spacefaring at all, because everybody is a stakeholder when it comes to space. So I think increasingly, states and other stakeholders are beginning to realize that, and they are becoming more actively involved in space security discussions in the UN context. As I was saying, space services are very much essential to human life on Earth. And for emerging spacefaring actors, they are particularly impacted by threats to the security of the space systems because they do not have the redundancy of more developed, more powerful spacefaring actors. So if they only have one satellite in orbit that provides services to them, some of which might be critical in nature, and that satellite is damaged, even if it's temporarily only, the population that relies on those services is not going to be able to rely on that through their indigenous capabilities. They might either be left without, or they might have to rely on a third party, which might not always be convenient. So they are very much impacted by space security issues, and that's why one of the questions that we get the most at UNIDIR from these kind of like middle powers and emerging or non-spacefaring states is, why should we really care about space security issues when we don't really have that much stake in it? And it's actually, you do have a lot of stake in it. You should care. First of all, because if you're not there to advocate for your own interests and your own rights, nobody else is going to do it for you. And then we might have a situation like, for example, as we do with climate issues, where some complaints from states from the global south are, powerful states came, essentially messed everything up, and now we have to deal with the consequences. And the second issue is that you should care because you can be very deeply impacted whether you have assets or you do not yet have assets. You have to ensure that the space environment is maintained as a sustainable environment so that you might in the future be able to increase your activity in space or start your activity in space. So yeah, they are definitely very impacted, and they should definitely be involved in these discussions to make sure that their opinions are taken into account.
Okay, thank you. Thoughts for the rest of the panel?
So I think one thing that's been really interesting to see is the shift on training and education on the emerging markets for space. And so shifting that focus just from a few elite understanding how space operates and being able to operate in space to a much larger community. And so we've seen so many more space foundation courses, both in universities, but also in militaries around the world, and space agencies around the world, and seeing so many more countries and people getting involved in space and learning how to safely operate in the environment. And I think that that's a really important piece of the conversation, and we're really excited to play a small part in that role as well.
Great, thank you. Aya?
I forgot your question. Is it why do?
How does the role of sustainability and security affect either emerging actors or
Including commercials.
including commercial? Yeah.
So I think Almun touched upon emerging space nations. So I'm going to talk about the commercial actors, and it's really important to keep in mind that all actors share the same orbit in outer space, so we cannot separate territorial area like on the ground. So, and as Carrie said, if I correct your pronunciation, sorry. I think a commercial space actor have been voluntarily taking measures for space sustainability, taking more active measures for space debris mitigation or deorbiting measures. It's all great for sustainability, but what is common between space sustainability and security is both involves the concept of protecting space assets from threats or risks. One is for space security, protecting assets from sort of human-made or intended threats or risks to the space assets. On the space security, space sustainability side, threats and risks caused by unintended ones caused by debris. But all these two kind of create the same effects on space operators, if I make sense. So I think regardless, we are commercial actors working working on voluntary measures or space sustainability areas, but at the same time, it's not enough to keep the space environment safe and sustainable for them. So, of course, commercial space sector, I mean, there are limited things to do directly to do space security, but it's really important to keep an eye on what's going on space security area.
Right, definitely. I mean, I think the point that I'd like to make here is that, you know, space debris is agnostic in terms of who it approaches. It's going to do what it's going to do, and whether you are an ally or a rival of the entity that made that debris, that's going to be the issue there. As well, you know, every single person on this planet is a user of space data or services in one way, shape, or form. So there is absolutely an interest in making sure there's uninterrupted access to those services so that they're at times of need. I'd like to talk a little bit more about, you know, again, the role of the commercial sector. We touched about this a little bit, but how is the commercial sector affected by interruptions to access to space, interruptions to space security and stability? How does it respond to an unpredictable domain? I'm guessing our commercial people would like to take that one first.
So I think
someone has to take it.
One example is the space debris caused by, you know, ASAT testing. I think still we hear news of, I think, collision risks caused by the space debris created in ASAT testing a long time ago, as well as the recent one. So I think space debris caused by ASAT testing definitely affect, and it could risk the entire satellite's risk as well. So I think that's one example, and I will pass it on to you.
So I'll say that with the increase in space debris, we're seeing that a lot more of the commercial assets have to maneuver a lot more to avoid collisions, either with other satellites or with these larger pieces of debris. And so the more that these assets have to maneuver, the shorter their lifespan is and the less sustainable their life cycle is. And so I think that's one impact that we've definitely seen with how much more congested it's getting up in space, both from a debris perspective as well as just from more assets in orbit.
Thank you. And this discussion of ASAT test debris leads into something I wanted to talk about as well. Again, the deliberate creation of debris is starting to be seen internationally as being an irresponsible act. Just because, again, even under the best case of circumstances, which I hope astronauts will be able to do, you know, to be able to remove debris, no one is saying, okay, I'm going to go up there and be able to remove 3,000 pieces of debris from an anti-satellite test. No one. That's just not something that people are going to think about. And so what you're doing is you're stuck with the debris up until it decides to deorbit itself and burn itself up in Earth's atmosphere, which means you have no control, there's threats. The Secure World Foundation, as I said, puts out a global counterspace threat assessment. This is a very wonky thing to say, but table 5.1 is my favorite table in the whole book, because what it does is we track all the debris that's been created from anti-satellite tests at the beginning of the space age. So of that, there's been about 6,800 pieces of debris created from anti-satellite tests. Of that, about 3,500 pieces of debris are still around. Some of this debris has been around for decades. And the longer the debris is up there, the longer it's going to be there to threaten other actors. So one of the things we're really happy to see is there's been a movement lately by some countries to commit not to conduct destructive anti-satellite missile tests, largely because of the debris that's been created. The United States was the first to announce it. It's since been joined by 36 other countries. As well, the United Nations General Assembly did a resolution in December 2022 supporting this, calling for more countries to do this. 155 countries voted in support of this, 9 against, 9 abstentions. So that's a pretty wide variety there. I'd love to hear more discussions in the United Nations about the role of trying to figure out, okay, how you can responsible and irresponsible behavior and how that affects space sustainability and security.
Sure. So the responsible behaviors approach was born, it was actually not born in the space security field. People that do cyber security have been talking about it for a while. But in space security, it came around, I think it was in 2020 that the UK proposed a resolution titled Reducing Space Threats Through Norms, Rules and Principles of Responsible Behaviors. As you can see, we do like short, brief and catchy names at the UN. So through this resolution, which was approved by the General Assembly encouraged states and other stakeholders to share their views with the Secretary General on what they considered to be responsible or irresponsible behaviors and what they considered to be essentially the key threats to space security. And several institutions, states from all over the world, as well as governmental actors, including both UNIDIR and the Secure Law Foundation, submitted their views. And one thing that became apparent in this bottoms-up approach was that even though states might have different views on how to address space security concerns, whether it's through a legally binding agreement, a non-legally binding agreement, a focus on capabilities, a focus on activities, or whatnot, what pretty much all agreed to a certain degree is that we're concerned kind of about the same things. Debris is an issue that is very high on the list. Non-kinetic threats, they get a little bit less attention, but they also generate quite a bit of concern. So that initial approach to responsible behaviors was pretty successful, and it led to the creation of another resolution the next year to create an open-ended working group on, again, reducing space threats through norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviors. This group ran through 2022 and 2023. It had 4 sessions in total, and although the group didn't achieve the consensus report that it was mandated to agree on, it's not, I wouldn't consider it a failure of a group. It actually really moved discussions forward. It was in the context of this group that the United States proposed this commitment not to conduct direct descent ASAT testings. So, and that was not the only issue that states agreed on. I think there was an approach definitely on the compatibility of different approaches and how different initiatives can actually work together instead of being conceived as mutually exclusive. And so those conversations were taken to the next process that we had, which just concluded this year, a group of governmental experts on further practical measures for PAROs, which actually achieved a consensus report. It's the first consensus report that we've ever had in the history of PAROs. PAROs stands for the Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space. We've been talking about this for over 40 years. So this is a huge success. And now we are about to have, I don't know if it's going to be 1 or 2 groups. One of them is potentially going to be on this responsible behaviors approach, which is going to focus more on the issues that were raised as important threats during this initial discussion, such as rendezvous and proximity operations. The issue of space debris is going to be further discussed. So it's moved the discussion forward, and I'm excited to see where states take this and what solutions can be found.
Thanks, Almu. Yeah, and I just wanted to point out the commercial sector has historically not wanted to get involved in any of these discussions, whether it's sustainability or security, just saying, hey, well, that's not our lane. You know, we're here to make money. We're here for, you know, a good time, not a long time. But I mean, I think that's really changed. Aya brought up the idea of the commercial sector trying to look at sustainability best practices. And about 5 years ago, it was wild, about 3 different industry groups came up with separate, but I think complementary space sustainability practices because they recognized that this was going to be an issue and that they wanted to be involved in it. Excuse me. As well, in terms of the security issues, going back to this anti-satellite test moratorium, a lot of commercial actors have actually talked about this and said, look, we think this is a good idea. We want to operate in this domain. We don't want to be interfered with. We don't want our investment to be lost by being hit by a piece of debris, whether it's created deliberately or not. So my organization, the Secure World Foundation, coordinated an industry statement of support, basically saying debris is bad, deliberately creating debris is bad. Some countries have agreed not to deliberately make more debris through these tests. We support that. And actually, this panel, both the commercial actors, Ashland Scale and Slingshot, signed that industry statement of support. And just really quickly, if you maybe either Carrie or I, if you could talk a little bit about why you thought it was so important to have a public statement about the importance of space security and stability as a commercial actor.
Sure, yeah, so from a Slingshot perspective, space sustainability is extremely core to who we are as a company. And so supporting that initiative was really a no-brainer for us. And we wanted to make sure that space will remain, useful for future generations for as long as possible. And I think that that's just a core principle of who we are.
So, of course, we Astroscale is developing technology to remove space debris, but then the best way is not to create debris from the beginning. And technically, there is no feasible or cost-effective technology to remove small pieces of debris. It's better to, if we talk about active debris removal, it's better to remove it like large pieces of risk of debris. So, yes, we astroscale in line with the space sustainability, and also this, intentionally creating a space debris is no good things for our space orbit or space operators. So that's
Thank you. And right now we have 51 companies from 15 countries that have signed this. If anyone in the audience knows anyone interested, please come see me. We have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience. Oh, yeah, there are. Okay, a very decided hand in the middle. If you could please identify yourself and your question. We have only 5 minutes. Let's be quick. Thanks.
Hey everyone, Emma Kerr, DSTL UK. I love the discussion on debris, don't get me wrong, but it was great to hear you guys talking about cyber and about non-kinetic threat. How do you propose to hold bad actors to account when attribution is so difficult?
Who wants to take that one?
I can try. Yeah, I feel like this is, so I'm an international lawyer, and I feel like this is the bane of every single international lawyer, like the issue of enforceability. So this is tough. I think when it comes to non-kinetic threats, especially, these are very difficult to identify. So I think for the purposes of verification, you're not going to be able to do it just with SSA. You're going to need a bunch of verification tools, including information exchanges, including, for example, all of those recommendations that were issued by the group of governmental experts on transparency and confidence building measures back in 2013, which dealt with communication, notifications, information exchanges, all that. You're going to need a lot of transparency to be able to create the climate where the norm is not just mistrust, but rather the norm is trust. And when you deviate from the norm, that's when you can point to, oh, this person might be doing something dodgy. We should look into it. So I think that's a first step. I think disclosing policies, doctrines, etc. of different states is a good way to achieve this. At UNIDIR, we have a space security portal where we publish everybody's policies and doctrines. So we encourage everybody to get in touch with us for that, or to check that website out. Clarity in terms of the language that we use, clarity in terms of the interpretation of legal concepts will help to discern what is allowed and what is not allowed. And also, I think it's important that states call out behaviors that are perceived as either irresponsible or even breaches of international law. I think we have a really robust legal framework for space, and we often forget about it. So it's important to realize that the OSC is there to be used. I would love to see states reference the OSC's articles a lot more than they do.
Right, and then just going on the sustainability angle, I think a lot of times, I mean, it is best practice, I think, in terms of from a business model, from one of your civil space capabilities, from an academic viewpoint, like long-term, sustainability is going to be better for you. But there are costs, in the upfront. You have to build in cybersecurity practices. You may have to shorten the lifespan of your satellite just to make sure you can deorbit it at the time of your manner of your choosing, as opposed to letting it run out the clock. And so I think there's always going to be bad actors who want to save a buck. They want to save some money. They don't want to do this sort of thing. And that's where having an understanding in terms of what's responsible behavior, what are the best practices, if it's from an international perspective, is going to be very helpful. I think I saw one hand in the back. Yeah. And then really quickly, please, we're about 2 minutes left.
Thank you very much for a fascinating panel. The U.S. Space Force's latest space threat fact sheet underscores a number of issues, but mentions, quote, a very concerning ASAT capability using a new satellite designed to carry a nuclear weapon being developed by Russia. What can you tell us, and what can be done? Thank you.
You guys okay if I take that one? Okay. All right. So really quickly, Secure World Foundation, as I said, does a global counter-space threat assessment. That's actually harkening back to the beginning of the Cold War, when the U.S. and the Soviet Union were both looking at anti-satellite weapons by blowing up a nuke in space with the idea that EMP would take out satellites. Now, this is not something that Russia has reportedly has put in orbit. Supposedly, it's a warhead that's being developed with the idea that eventually put up in space. So there is time to have discussions about what, consequences of that could be, and to promote an international approach, reminding all countries of their obligations on the Outer Space Treaty. Article 4 is very clear. You cannot put weapons of mass destruction up in orbit. And then we have one last question in the back, please.
Hey, good afternoon. My name's Roshan Menon, and space debris was actually the topic I did my thesis on at Leiden University. So this has been a very interesting panel for me. I am curious, actually, with the importance of SSA data today and how deeply it is connected to national security, do you see the sharing of SSA data in the future being something that states take the lead on, or is this something that companies are going to start taking more action towards? Thank you.
Let's hear what you guys think.
Yeah, so I would say that from a Slingshot Aerospace perspective, we definitely see commercial companies playing a larger role in SSA as we're developing more assets. I think that it's such a large problem, and so we all need to work together to provide as much information to as many people as possible. So whether that's the Department of Commerce Tracks program, or other programs around the world that's providing that information to commercial operators, I think it's really important that the most amount of people have access to that information.
Okay, well, we're about at time, but I'd love to give my panelists just 30 seconds. If you wanted the people in this audience to have one takeaway from your remarks on the relationship between space sustainability and space security, what would that thing be? And I'm going to go the person sitting next to me, Alma.
Sure. Thank you, Victoria. Great panel. It was a pleasure to be part of this wonderful panel, and thank you so much for the questions. So my takeaway would be something that I said at the very beginning. Space, sustainability, and security are not two things that are apart from each other. Again, I would define space sustainability as a coin that has two sides, one being space security and the other being space safety. And you do need both to achieve space sustainability. So you're not going to be able to have a sustainable space environment, and to a certain degree, not even a sustainable Earth environment, if you do not achieve space security.
So I completely agree with everything that you said. And then adding to that, I think it's really important that as we continue this conversation, that the most amount of people possible are part of that conversation. Like you mentioned before, whether you're an ally or an adversary, your actions affect everyone that's in space. And so the more that we can keep talking about the problem and have regulations that everyone will follow, the safer space becomes.
Yeah, adding on taking this effect of affecting everyone on space activities, I think if there's any no progress on security side, I think if the progress on space sustainability and safety side might have a good effect on security side. So hope that this interrelationship would have good virtuous cycle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that's but anyway, I think space security is not something that someone else's matters, but it affects all. So that's, I think, important takeaway from this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, just to underline the point, I think our behaviors affect everyone. And so the idea that actions you take can affect space sustainability, actions you take can affect space security, and then people completely unrelated can be harmed by these actions that hamper space sustainability and security. So it really requires a global approach to make sure that space is accessible and usable for all over the long term. So with that, appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking this panel for a fantastic discussion.